What's going on, my dear friends? Today in this video, let's learn and master the Angular framework's latest version. So let's get started. So guys, what is this data binding? Guys, we use Angular to build dynamic websites, not static websites. You guys are here to learn how to build a dynamic front end using the Angular. So if you are building something static, front end for something app, you do not need to learn Angular, right? So you can do this only using the HTML and CSS. So in this section, we learn about how to dynamically interact with data in Angular. So let's dive in. So guys, inside our app component HTML file, we got this h1 tag. So inside this h1 tag, we hand coded this text. So now what I want to do is, I want to make this hand coded static text into a dynamic text. So how do we do that? Very simple. So first let's create a variable inside the component TS file, something title. So how do we create a variable in TypeScript? Very easy. Inside this class scope. So guys, keep this in your mind. We write all the logics and codes of this component inside this class scope, right? So outside of this class scope, any code, it will not work. Alright, so let's create a variable. The variable name something title. So like JavaScript, we don't need to use any variable keywords like var, let or const keywords. Alright, so next we have to define the type of this TypeScript variable. So add the colon and the type is string. So guys, for this variable, we are going to assign a string value. So after this equal sign, the value is, put this inside quotes, this loaded dynamically. Alright, so guys, now what I want to do is, I want to load this text inside the browser. So how do we do that? In order to load this text inside the browser, we have to somehow load this title variable inside the HTML file. As you guys know, the browser will only load this HTML file inside the browser view, not the TypeScript file, right? In order to do this, guys, in Angular, we have a different approach. So for this, we can use string interpolation. So let's see this in action. So inside the app component HTML file, let's create another new heading text for this. So after this, this time create a h2 tag. And now I want to pass the title variable to this h2 tag. As I said earlier, for this we can use the string interpolation. It's very simple. So between these h2 tags, open and close two curly brackets, and between these curly brackets, pass the variable name, which is this title. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this loaded the title text inside the browser view. Awesome, right? So guys, in the previous lecture, we look at a basic functionality of a string interpolation. So now in this lecture, let's see how this string interpolation works and what we can do with this string interpolation. So let's get started. So guys, as I said in the previous lecture, using Angular, we are going to build a dynamic website or an application, not a static website, right? So in order to make the Angular application dynamic, we have to manipulate data between our Angular components. So for this, we have several techniques in Angular. So this string interpolation, one of them. In this lecture, let's see how this string interpolation works. Let's look at the previous example. In here, app component TS file, we create this variable, and using this string interpolation method, we loaded this title text inside the browser. So some of you guys may wonder, first thing first, this title variable is inside the app component TS file, but using the string interpolation, we added this title variable inside the HTML file. So how this possible? What is the connection between these two files? So the first thing first, you guys should understand in an Angular component, the TypeScript file is the main file. So we do all the things inside this TypeScript file. So if you guys can remember, we linked the HTML and CSS file to this component, and also we imported the other nesting components also to this component TS file. So without this component TS file, we cannot create an Angular component. So this is the main file of an Angular component. So in here, we are connected our HTML file with this component file. So this is how the connection built with these two files. So inside this, we created this TypeScript variable. So in order to load this inside the HTML file, we cannot directly add this title variable inside the HTML file, because this is a TypeScript variable and this is a HTML scope. So in order to add this inside the HTML file, we have to create a TypeScript scope inside this HTML scope, right? So that is what we are doing with this string interpolation. So between these curly brackets, we are creating a TypeScript scope. So as you guys know, inside of an HTML file, in order to write a CSS style, we can create a CSS scope, right? For this, we can use the style tag. Same as this, in order to write a JavaScript code inside of HTML file, we can create a JavaScript scope using the script tags. Between these tags, we can write any valid JavaScript logics, right? This is also the same like this. Inside of this HTML file, we are creating a TypeScript scope and we are accessing the component TypeScript variable. So this is how this string interpolation works. So once again guys, with these curly brackets, we are creating a kind of a TypeScript scope inside the HTML file. So we call this special type of Angular syntax string interpolation. So in Angular, using this, we can show a data inside of an HTML file, which is declared inside of the component TS file. When the Angular compiler sees this string interpolation, this will automatically look inside the relevant component file and print the relevant variable data inside the HTML view. So for example, when the Angular compiler compiles this component, we'll see this string interpolation inside the app component HTML file. Then what will this Angular compiler will do? Angular compiler will immediately look inside the relevant components TS file, which is the app component TS file. If this is the header component, Angular compiler will look inside the header component TS file, not the app components TS file, right? This will look inside the relevance components TS file. So using this string interpolation, we can show any type of data to the end user. So we use this title. This is a string value. But guys, don't get confused. Even this called string interpolation, we can show number values and boolean values to the end user using this same string interpolation. So inside of a string interpolation scope, we can pass any valid variables and also even we can do simple calculations. So let's see an example for this down here. Create a p tag and create a string interpolation. Now inside this scope, add this 1 plus 1. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, we can see the answer of 1 plus 1, 2, right? So guys, this is how this string interpolation scope works. Most of the time in Angular, we use this string interpolation to load dynamic data inside of a browser view. In other words, we call this data binding. So this is how we bind data in Angular component. Hope you guys got the idea. So guys, before we move on, I want to show you something. So guys, creating this TypeScript scope inside of HTML, we call this string interpolation, right? So why do we Angular named this as a string interpolation? Why this string? Is it something there? So guys, in this lecture, let's look at this. Guys, in the previous lecture, I said inside of this string interpolation scope, we can pass not only string values, we can pass number values or boolean values even we can do simple mathematical calculations. But guys, in each and every operation, the string interpolation will return a string value. So for example, inside of this, we passed our title value. It's already a string value. So when this output, the value inside the browser, this will automatically converted as a string value. So in our case, this is already a string value. So this will return a string value, right? But think if we pass a number inside this string interpolation, what will happen? So guys, this will automatically convert this number to a string value, right? So this is applied for the Boolean values as well. So if you do a small calculation here, like 2 plus 1, inside the browser, we can see only the answer, not the 2 plus 1 calculation. So what will happen here? So this string interpolation will calculate this value and get the answer before it's showing inside the browser, and it will convert this answer value to string value, right? No matter what type of data we are sending into this string interpolation, by the end of the day, before this load inside the browser, the string interpolation will convert all that data to a string value. That's why this is named as string interpolation. Hope you guys got the idea. So guys, in the previous lecture, we learned how to load a text value dynamically inside the browser view. So now let's look at another scenario. Think that we have image URL inside of our database. So we are loading it to a variable inside the component.ts file. And what do we have to do is we have to load that image inside the browser view. So how do we do that? First, let's create a variable for this inside the component.ts file. So the variable name is something img URL. So this type also string. For this, I will copy image URL value from the Google image. So copy this image URL and paste it inside this variable value. So guys, now we have the image URL. Now what do we have to do is we have to load this image URL inside the browser view. So in order to show an image inside the browser, not only image, in order to show anything inside the browser, we have to add that inside the HTML file, right? So go to the component.html file and create an image tag. So why do we have to create an image tag? In order to show an image inside the browser view, we have to use this image HTML tag, right? So down here, the image tag. Now inside this src attribute, we have to pass the path of the image that we want to load inside this img tag. We already stored this inside of a variable. Now what I want to do is I want to load that image path or the URL to this src attribute. So how do we do that? For this also we can use the same previous approach, string interpolation. This is a TypeScript variable. So this is a HTML file. In order to pass a TypeScript variable to this, we have to create a TypeScript scope inside this. Okay. So between these codes, create a string interpolation, open and close two curly brackets. Inside this, pass the variable name img URL. Guys, follow the capital simple letters carefully. That's it. So save this file and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, we can see the image inside the browser view. Guys, even this string interpolation loads this image inside the browser dynamically. We will not use this approach when we bind a data to HTML property like this src property, right? For this, we have a better approach. We call this approach in Angular property binding. So let's see how to do this. This is very simple. First thing first, we have to wrap the property inside of a square brackets. So in our case, our HTML property is this src. So wrap this inside of square brackets. Now we don't need this string interpolation. So remove this curly brackets and keep this variable as it is. So guys, this is what we call as a property binding. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this time also we got the image inside the browser. So guys, you guys may get confused. Why are we using this property binding without using the string interpolation approach? So let's find the answer for this in the next lecture. So guys, as in the previous lecture, we loaded this image dynamically using this string interpolation as well as using the property binding approach. So in these both approaches, this image was loaded inside the browser without any problem. But why do we need another binding approach if this is loading with this string interpolation approach? To find the answer for this, let's see another example. So create a button down here. So the button tags and the button text will be something disable button. Guys, now what I want to do is I want to disable this button dynamically. So for this, I'm going to create a variable inside the component.ts file. So go to the component.ts file and after this create a variable something called is disabled, and this type will be boolean, right? So as a default value to this boolean, add a true value. Now back to the HTML file. Inside this, let's disable this button using our is disable variable. So the property of this disabling is disabled. So first let's use the string interpolation approach. So inside the curly brackets, pass our variable is disabled. That's it. So save this all and go to the browser. Right guys, before we go to the browser, let's duplicate this button again, and for the second button, let's use the property binding approach. So remove the string interpolation scope and wrap this disable property with the square brackets. So this is what we call property binding, right? So again, change this button text for the first button disabled using string interpolation. The second button text is disabled using property binding. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this first button is not disabled, which we use the string interpolation method. And the second button is successfully disabled, which we used property binding approach. So what's going on here? So guys, if you can remember in the previous lecture, I told you that even if we use any kind of a data inside of a string interpolation, it will be converted to a string value when it's loaded inside the browser. So in order to disable this button, we have to pass a boolean value. But with the string interpolation, this boolean true value will be automatically converted to a string value. So that's why in this first button, this is not working. So the second button, this disable, is working because this property binding will not convert this boolean value into string value data type. So guys, this is the main difference between these two string interpolation and property binding approaches. So guys, this is the main reason that Angular team built these two kinds of data binding approaches in Angular. So guys, string interpolation can be worked in some HTML properties, but the most of the time this will not work. So as a good practice, we have to use property binding when we dealing with an HTML property. If you are loading something simple text inside of an HTML tag inside the browser view, for this we can use this string interpolation. Otherwise, we can use this property binding. So hope you guys got the idea. Alright guys, in the previous lecture we learned about property binding. In this section, let's learn about another important concept in Angular, class binding. So what is this class binding? Class binding is a way to dynamically add or remove CSS classes to an HTML element based on a condition or expression. For example, think about a simple scenario where you have a button on your web page. You want this button to have a different style when it's clicked. Maybe you want the button to turn green when it's active and red when it's not. So in a traditional HTML and CSS setup, you would have to manually add and remove classes to achieve this, right? But with Angular's class binding, we can automate this process. So let's see this in action. So let's take the same scenario as the previous. Just want to change the button color based on a condition. right? So let's do this. Go to the app component HTML file and create a button. So the button tag and the button text will be something click me. That's it. So now we have the button. Next we need the condition. For this we'll use a simple boolean value for this example also. So as you guys know, we do all the dynamic things inside the component TypeScript file. So go to the app component TS file and create a boolean variable. So the boolean variable name is active and the data type is boolean. So after this colon and the data type is boolean. So next let's assign a default value to this false. That's it. So next what I want to do is I want to change this button's background color to something green when this is active value set to true. So how do we do that? For this we can use the class binding approach. Wait, before that we have to define the CSS style, right? So guys, we write CSS styles related to this component inside the app component CSS file. Okay, so open the app component CSS file and let's define the CSS style. The CSS class is something, name it active. So dot active and CSS scope. Inside this we'll set the background color to green. Now guys, we have the CSS class. Next let's do the conditional logic using the class binding approach. So inside the button opening tag, open and close a square bracket. Inside this class, so we are dealing with the class binding. So this binding name is class. So after this dot, now we have to pass the CSS class that we want to apply to this button conditionally. So which is this active CSS class. So pass this here after this dot. So next the equal sign, then we have to pass the condition, which is our boolean value variable, right? So is active. Don't forget to pass this inside of quotes. That's it. So guys, this is the class binding syntax. Very simple, right? So now save this and go to the browser. We can see this button, but this is now in green color. So what is the problem here? Of course, in the initial stage, we set this boolean value to false. Then this condition statement returns false. Then this CSS class will not apply to this button. If I change this is active value to true, save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this time this green color applied to this button, which means this active CSS class applied to this button successfully. Wait, so let's confirm this. Go to the browser inspect element. Inside this we can find our HTML code. Inside this app root we can see our button tag. Inside this we can see this CSS active class applied. So guys, this is the simple use case of class binding in Angular. Simply this will add or remove CSS classes to an HTML element based on a condition. In the previous lecture, we used the class binding when this condition returned true. Think if we want to change this button color to something red when no active status or when this return false. So how do we do that? Very simple. So let's see this in action. First thing first, let's define a CSS class to this no active status. So go to the app component CSS file and define this. The CSS class name something no dash active and the CSS scope. Inside this set the background color to red. That's it. Now we have the CSS. Next let's see how to apply this both CSS classes to our target button based on a condition using only the class binding. For this guys, we can use another class binding in this button for this no active status. So let's see this in action. So let's do this. Inside the app component HTML file, after this first class binding, let's write our second class binding. Inside of square brackets, the binding name is class. So add class inside the square brackets. So after this dot, now pass the CSS class that we want to bind to this button, which is this no active CSS class. So next the condition. This time we want to apply this CSS class to this when this active conditions return false. So for this we have to use the not operator. So the not operator is represent with the exclamation mark. So after this the boolean variable name is active. So guys, with this not operator, we are checking the opposite of this value returns. Usually this binding works when this returns true. With this not operator, we are telling this to work when this return false. So this is the simple idea about this not operator. So guys, that's it. Save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, the button is green. Why is that? Yes, of course, now this boolean value is set to true. So let's change this to false. Again, save this all and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this time this button background changed to red, which means our second class binding also working as we planned. So guys, this is how we bind two class binding to a single HTML element Angular. Alright guys, this is task time. So let's do a small task. This time I want to add a yellow color border with the green background color for this button when this returns true. Otherwise, I want to change the border color to something blue color with the previous red background color. So guys, this is the task for you. Make the button border yellow when it's true. If the boolean value is false, set the background color to blue. So take your time. Take the help of the previous lectures and try to do it yourself. Once you complete the task, you can continue to next lecture. Alright, hope you guys did the task well. Now let's see how to do this. Guys, for this also we can simply use another class binding inside this button tag. So let's do this. First thing first, we need the CSS style for these border styles. So let's define them. Inside the app component CSS file, add this, the class name, something dot active dash border. The style is border. So let's set these to 5 pixels solid and the border color will be yellow. So this style is for the active status. Again, we need another style for non-active status. So I'm going to duplicate this, change the CSS class name to no active border. Change this border color to blue. Now we have the styles, so let's load this inside the view conditionally by using the class binding approach. So inside the HTML5, inside this button tag, again another class binding, inside square brackets, class dot the CSS class name, active dash border. So guys, we want to apply this active border to the button when this return true. So the variable name is active. So again, next for the no active status, for this also again create another class binding inside square brackets, class dot the CSS class name, which is this no dash active dash border. So now we want to apply this when this boolean value return false. So we have to check the opposite of this. So use the not operator. The not operator symbol is exclamation mark, and after this add the variable name is active. That's it. So save this all and go to the browser. Now this is in red background with blue border. Why is that? Yes, of course. Now this is active value is false. So this applied the styles of no active CSS class. Next, let's change this to true and save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, now this is in green background with yellow border, which means this active class binding CSS styles applied to this button. So guys, like this, you guys can bind CSS classes to an HTML element as much as you guys wanted. But guys, keep this in your mind. Stacking too much of class binding to a single element is not a good practice. For this, we have a better approach and easy approach in Angular. We will learn about this in the later section. Guys, in the previous lecture, we worked with the class binding using a boolean value. But think what if we have to load a CSS style to an HTML element based on a string value. For example, we want to change the background color of this button based on a something fruit's name, which is stored inside of a string variable. So how do we do that? So let's see this in action. First, I create a variable to store the fruit's name. So go to the app component TS file and create a variable for this. The variable name is something fruit name. Then set the variable type to string. Now assign a default value to this something apple. So add this inside of quotes because this is a string value, right? So next, let's create another new button for this. Inside the component HTML file, down here, create another button tags and set the button name to something fruit ninja. Next, we need a CSS class for this. So let's define that as usual. Go to the app component CSS file and define a new CSS class, something dot apple. Inside this, let's set the button background color to red and set the border color to something green. Now let's apply this style to this when the string value is set to apple. So how do we do that? For this also we can use the same class binding approach. So inside the HTML file, inside this button tag, create a class binding. How do we do that? You guys already know this. Yes, of course. First we have to create a square brackets and inside this class and dot. Now we have to pass this CSS class name, which is this apple. So next, the condition, we have to check whether this variable fruit name is set to apple or not. So for this we can use the equals operator. So let's see this in action. So inside this open and close double quotes, now the variable name is fruit's name. After this equals operator double equal signs. So hope you guys know about these operators, right? So this is nothing to deal with Angular. This is something basic knowledge of JavaScript. Alright, so next we have to check whether this variable value is equals to apple or not. So again create another quotes. This time create single quotes because we cannot create another double quotes inside of double quotes, right? So inside this single quotes, the value that we want to check is apple. So pass it here. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this apple CSS style are applied to this fruit ninja button because this fruit name is set to apple. If I change this value to orange, as you guys can see here, this time these CSS styles are not applied to this button. Because in here we made this condition apply this CSS class to this button element when this variable value equals to apple. Hope you guys got the idea. So guys, in here if you look at this carefully, even if you use a string value to check this, but in the end the statement also return a boolean value. If the string value equals to this, the statement will return true, and Angular class binding will apply this CSS class to this button. If this value is different than this past value, this will return false, and class binding will not apply to this style to this button. In order to work with Angular class binding, no matter what variable types you are using for this, in the end you have to pass a boolean value to this class binding. So hope you guys got the idea.